You know, every time you see a plane in the sky, whether it's a tiny two-seater or a massive airliner, what you don't see is the mountain of paperwork that keeps it flying safely. It's this unseen shield of documents, records, and manuals, all working together to make sure that aircraft is ready and, just as importantly, legal to fly. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on this critical foundation of aviation safety. So, what's the very first thing a pilot does before a flight? You might think it's flipping switches or firing up the engines, but nope. The most important part of any flight actually begins on the ground, with a deep dive into the plane's official documents. This is where safety is really built long before the aircraft even starts to move.
All right, so here's our flight plan for today. We're going to explore the 4 essential layers of this paper shield. We'll start with the plane's ultimate rulebook, then we'll get into its legal license to fly, followed by its complete health history. And we'll wrap things up by answering a really interesting question. What are the rules for flying when something isn't working perfectly?
First up, the instruction manual. Now, I want you to erase that image of the flimsy little booklet that came with your toaster. For an airplane, this manual isn't a bunch of suggestions, it's the ultimate legally binding authority on exactly how that machine has to be operated.
It is so important to get this distinction. A generic owner's manual is great for general info, for studying, but the official FAA-approved rulebook, that's called the Airplane Flight Manual, or AFM, and it's usually part of the much bigger Pilot's Operating Handbook, or POH. This thing is a whole different animal. It's specific to one single aircraft right down to the serial number, and you are legally required to have it on board.
And when I say it's a rule book, I'm not kidding. The federal regulations are crystal clear, stating a pilot must comply with this information. These aren't guidelines, they aren't best practices. They are the absolute non-negotiable rules for flying that plane safely, period.
With so much critical information, you can bet it has to be incredibly organized. And it is. Every modern POH is structured in this standard way, covering everything from normal checklists to emergency procedures. For a pilot, this is the single source of truth for their specific aircraft. It's where they find the plane's absolute limits and the performance data they need for every single flight.
Now, of all those sections, Section 2, Limitations, is really the heart of the manual safety rule. It defines the absolute boundaries of what that airplane can do, the speeds, the weights, the forces it was designed to handle. And I'm going to say it again, these limits are not negotiable.
The really cool part is that these limitations aren't just buried in a book, they're literally painted right onto the instruments. The color coding on this airspeed indicator comes directly from the POH. The green arc is your normal operating range. The white arc is for flying with the flaps down, and the yellow arc is a caution zone for smooth air only. And that red line, that's VNE, the never exceed speed. Go past that and you are risking catastrophic structural failure.
And the limits go way beyond just speed. The POH sets hard lines for engine RPM, maximum aircraft weight, and the critical center of gravity range, which keeps the plane balanced and controllable. It even specifies which maneuvers, like certain kinds of aerobatics, are strictly forbidden in that aircraft.
Okay, so we've got the rule book established. Now we can add the next layer to our shield. Beyond knowing how to fly, an aircraft needs documents that prove it has the legal right to be in the air. This is its official license to fly.
This all starts with the Certificate of Registration. It's just like the registration for your car. It proves who owns the aircraft. It's a pretty simple idea, but it is absolutely mandatory to have it on board for every single flight.
Next up is the big one, the Airworthiness Certificate. This is the FAA's official stamp. It declares that the aircraft meets its approved design and is in a condition for safe operation. And by law, this certificate can't be just tucked away in a glove box. It has to be displayed right where passengers and crew can see it.
But here's the catch. Airworthiness is not a one-and-done deal. That certificate is only valid for as long as the aircraft is continuously and properly maintained according to the rules. It's a promise of ongoing safety, which leads us perfectly to our next layer.
So how do you prove an aircraft is being properly maintained? Well, you look at its health record, the maintenance logbooks. These books contain the entire life story of the aircraft, every inspection, every repair, and every modification it has ever had.
For most small aircraft, the rhythm of maintenance is built around 2 key inspections. The annual is a deep bumper-to-bumper checkup that happens every 12 months. Then, if the plane is used for hire, like in flight training, it also needs a slightly less intensive inspection every 100 hours of flight time. And it doesn't stop there. Specific systems have their own countdown clocks. The altimeter and transponder get checked every 2 years.
The Emergency Locator Transmitter, or ELT, is inspected every single year. It's this system of overlapping schedules, all designed to make sure nothing is ever missed.
And finally, you have airworthiness directives, or ADs. The best way to think of these is as urgent, mandatory safety recalls for airplanes. If an unsafe condition is discovered in a specific aircraft design, the FAA issues an AD, legally requiring every owner of that model to perform a specific fix. Compliance isn't optional, it is mandatory.
This brings us to our final layer, which answers a very practical question. Let's be real, machines aren't perfect. So what happens when a pilot is doing their pre-flight check and finds that something is broken?
Can you actually fly with something broken on the plane? It's a great question, and the answer is sometimes. But you can't just shrug your shoulders and go, oh no. There is a very specific, regulated process a pilot has to follow to make that call legally and safely.
It's a clear four-step logic. First, the pilot has to ask, is this thing legally required by the POH or FIA regulations? If the answer is no, then the next question is, can I still operate this plane safely without it? If the answer is yes, then the item has to be deactivated, often just by pulling a circuit breaker. And finally, it gets a placard right next to it that clearly says inoperative.
You know, ultimately, all of this comes down to one fundamental principle. The owner is responsible for maintaining the aircraft in an airworthy condition. The manuals, the certificates, and the logbooks are the tools they use to fulfill that duty. So the next time you see a plane in the sky, remember that unseen shield. It's not just bureaucracy, it's a living system of rules and records, meticulously maintained on the ground so that every flight can be as safe as possible. What other unseen shields do you think keep our modern world running safely?